Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local
What reason can be given to justify the removal of some of this soil and its relocation to land with frontage to the North Esk River, which is owned by Joe Pintarich, and which will present a genuine contamination risk when the river next floods this land?
Yeah, I'll take that on notice as well. Thank you.
Okay. And my own questions. Since your climate emergency declaration in 2019, you have carried out or approved the destruction of huge numbers of mature trees, at least 70 to 80 of them plus across Invermay and Inveresk alone, just to make way for cars and inappropriate land uses that defy logic, given the estuary and sea level rise, and that also go against all the international research on climate change and sustainability, livability, etc. Question: what is A, the Council's understanding of the relationship between trees, climate science, carbon capture and climate change? And B, how does the destruction of so many mature trees, irrespective of plantings of claims of replanting, because you're not actually replanting mature trees, how does that fit with your own climate emergency declaration and your reasoning behind your livability survey?
Yeah, look, that's got obviously a lot of detail in it, so we'll need to take that on notice to provide an answer to.
And question two, in view of the Council's own livability survey, as well as B, your climate emergency declaration, and C, all the international research on the interrelationships between land use and climate change, and irrespective of the levies that you've got here, because all your irrespective of levies, what is your logic in ignoring the climate science by constantly adding and approving ever more traffic and inappropriate land uses on the Launceston flood inundation zone?
Yeah,
and could the councillors please address that question, not necessarily pass it to the planning department, which comes up with this stuff?
Yeah, we'll take that on notice as well. Thank you very much. Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Good afternoon. I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people who are the custodians and owners of this land where we meet, and I pay respects to elders past, present and future. Question 1. In the 1800s, the Launceston City Council needed to lower the ground levels in many areas of central Launceston to allow the horse-drawn carts to get up the hills. Stone retaining walls were built in front of houses and behind. These walls still exist. Who is responsible for maintaining these?
Yeah, I'm not aware who is, so we'll get that information and put an answer in our next council meeting.
Thank you, Albert. Question 2. As LCC is contributing to the cost of the collapsed wall at 1 York Street, is this not an admission for some level of responsibility for these stone walls? And consequently, if the retaining wall at 269 Charles Street is in such a state of bad repair, why hasn't the council done something about it before in the interest of public safety?
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be discussed when the item comes up as well, which is not that far away. So we'll be discussing that item and the councillors are aware of the question and that'll come up in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on notice? Or questions without notice, sorry. So thank you. We'll move on then. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included in Agenda Item 9, Planning Authority. So we have 9.1. We do have some speakers for 9.1. Just a reminder of the time limit for speakers, and there'll be a ding when it go off after the 2 minutes. So Bruce Jones first.
Good afternoon. Our house is at 46 Franklin Street on the southern boundary of 269 Charles Street. We agree that the existing house is beyond saving and their new buildings be designed to suit this clear site. Current drawings push the boundaries and there's been no compromise with regard to height or footprint since this application was last proposed. First item on your agenda regarding this is the discretion is setbacks. The front setback planning objective is 4 metres. Application is 2 metres. Rear setback planning objective is 2.5 metres. Applicant has 1.3 metres. Southern boundary setbacks by the applicant's admission are outside the planning objective. Northern boundary setbacks by the planning objective should be at least 3 metres for a building 8.5 metres high on the right-of-way. Applicant has a 1.5 metre setback, even after borrowing 0.4 of a metre from the right-of-way. The right-of-way is a very contentious issue. Surely, after not satisfying any boundary setbacks, the design should have been changed regarding height and footprint to accommodate the planning objectives rather than relying on performance criteria and endless subjectivity. If there was compromise on the design, rather than insisting on putting 2 dwellings on a 535 metre square block, the applicant would be able to satisfy the site facility objectives regarding visitor car parking and turning on the right-of-way. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Nancy Searcy.
Nancy Searcy, 25 West Park Drive, West Launceston. 269 Charles Street is on the Council's local heritage place list. Although not state listed, Tasmanian Heritage Council has a file on this property giving the likely construction date between 1839 to 1853. This differs to the LCC Planning Officer's date in the agenda, where he states it's 1880. The whole of Charles Street is a step back in time. The upper end is vibrant and it's cafes, restaurants and hotel. Added to this, it's jam-packed with heritage cottages, all of which are listed either by the state, LCC, or in most cases both. This is the place to be. Tourists and locals flock to it. People from interstate buy property here specifically to live in an area of historical significance. Numerous studies funded by LCC have referred to this area as having high integrity and intactness, advising properties should be retained and encouraging recovery where buildings have been unsympathetically altered. In the 1960s, a fire occurred at 269 Charles Street, destroying the roof of this one-storey property. A flat roof was put on. This is replaceable. Cracking on the cottage walls is due to intense heat. This is fixable. The stone wall can easily be strengthened by a proficient engineer. This repairing of old stone retaining walls is frequently done by council around town where roads are situated on split level. Demolition of this property is not necessary and in fact is only one of the options listed by the developer's engineer. Remember the cordial factory. This crooked wall was stabilised and straightened. The cracks big enough to put your hand in were repaired. This was a building the developers claimed to be unsavable. Look at the delightfully restored building we are presented with now. Please save 269 for a developer who will restore this rare little Georgian cottage and help retain the uniqueness of this precious area. Thank you.
Thank you. Gillian van der Scans.
Hello, my name is Gillian van der Scans from 12 Salisbury Crescent. I'm the designer of the proposal. This has been an exciting project in a mixed-use inner city area that contains both heritage buildings and award-winning contemporary buildings. Many layers of considerations have resulted in the presenter design solution that works as closely within the acceptable performance criteria of the planning scheme as it can, considering the complexity of the site. The proposal increases the density of housing on an inner urban site and is in keeping with the zone's objective. To reassure, the design proposal is for a high-quality building using crafted and quality materials, and the design intends to add to the city fabric in a lasting way. The fringing CBD is an attractive place to live for my client, who is an environmentally conscious person and wishes to create a home from where he can walk to work and enjoy the benefits of urban living in an environmentally sustainable home. The existing building on the site is highly compromised by insensitive alteration and is beyond repair. We investigated retaining the original building, but the structural report and the building's impact on the bluestone wall resulted in the conclusion that it was best removed from the site. It is the presence and the beauty of the bluestone wall that deserves restoration and preservation in this instance, and it is fortunate that my client has an appreciation of this wall and is willing to invest in its restoration. Contemporary quality buildings do not detract or damage the city fabric. They add to its vitality. This is not a cheap development solution. It's a home for the applicant, and the design choices and quality of the construction reflect this. Okay. Sorry.
That's all the speakers I have. Is there any other speakers out there that I can't see? No? Thank you. So it's 9.1. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Harris, moving.
I'd like to move a slightly amended motion, if I can, as in front of all the
yeah, the restoration of the blue.
Yeah, the restoration of blue wall as an additional condition.
Bluestone wall. Thank you. Got a copy of that there. That's moved by Councillor Harris. Is there a seconder? Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, I will. Thank you. This is an interesting DA. I guess I find myself torn between my heart and my head. My heart says here's a building that's probably 150 years old and we should try to do what we can to save it. My head says if we want to keep buildings like this, we have to do it sustainably, and that's economically sustainably as much as anything else. And so I spent yesterday looking at the site. I met Nancy on site, thank you for your time, Nancy. I also met Rosalie, who lives up the street, who also chose to live in that part of Charles Street because of the, I guess, as Nancy said, the vibe that you get in the place. It is a really nice place to be. However, as a child, I remember walking past that bluestone wall when I lived with my auntie for 3 months, and she worked at the hospital. And I always feared the thing was going to fall down on top of me because of its height and also all the cracks that have now been repaired, because I was probably only grade 2 at the time. So I've had a long, relationship with that wall, but I, like many others, love it. And in fact, it is the wall that I feel is worth retaining, and what's left of the original Georgian cottage without a roof, effectively, now has a flat roof, is probably less so. You must go back to the history of it. That cottage was built when the road wasn't as it is now. It was probably as the same level, and there was a big hump in the middle of Charles Street to get up to the hospital. The council at some point excavated, and you can see the bluestone walls at the other houses that were built in the 1880s and 1900s that are its neighbours, where they pushed it back and they have excavated down. So that's why this one sits up on top of a knoll, because that was there before anyone else was. When they come to build the wall went where the road decided it had to, and that is probably the fundamental engineering problem. Had it been further out, the weight of the house pushing down may not have impacted the wall as much as what it is. But the house was there first, the wall has to be where it is. So to me, if we are to retain the wall, we have to then look and say, well, how can we do this? And as the engineer's report has said, the easiest way to retain the wall is to pull it down, pull the house down, rebuild the wall, and then rebuild a new house on top of it. So really that is quite simple for me in my head as to how I think this will go. And that's what I'm advocating. Others who have said, why are you trying to build a 2-storey house on top of an elevated site, should only look across the road to the spur wing house, which is a 2-storey house, probably built in the 1930s to 50s, also above a bluestone wall. If you haven't noticed it, it's probably because of trees and things in front of it that block your view. But it in fact will be higher than what this proposed development actually will be. So I think if you look up and down the street, there are Victorian-style terraces at 263 and 265. There's Edwardian-style, Federation-style. There's a little 1840s wooden cottage that is currently being renovated. There's even Art Deco across at the Aromas Cafe. Down on the corner opposite the Sporties Hotel is a lovely 1960s brick building that I don't think will win any architectural awards, but all of it seems to just meld in together to what makes that particular part of Charles Street an active place. So I think a good architecturally designed building will add in the long term to this particular precinct, because in 50 years' time, someone will come back and say, yep, that really suited that site and has fitted into the other infrastructure, as you could sit and turn around and say about the Spur Wing House today. I'll leave it for that. I'll be interested to hear other councillors' thoughts on this, and we'll see how we go. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And as Councillor Harris has outlined, Charles Street is a tapestry of many different makes of houses, and like him, that bluestone wall's been a pretty special part of my life. I live not very far from the building and walk down through that area most days. Again, I'm always interested in the heritage. I chair the Heritage Advisory Committee in the council, so therefore whenever something comes up that has a heritage connotation to it, I look very closely at it. I also note that our Heritage Advisor has given advice in relation to the matter, and I'll read her comments in relation to the building. In relation to the age of the building, I think there was a challenge saying that it might have been 1835, and that may be the case, and that's not necessarily conflicting because it says in the mid-1800s that the building was built. But her considered opinion is that the remaining building on the site do not meet the HERCON assessment criteria for cultural heritage significance at the local or state level, and it is the stone retaining wall on the front boundary that provides the greatest contribution to the heritage character of the streetscape, which the original Charles Street precinct listing was intended to protect. She also says her advice was largely around the loss of integrity and character and lack of street presence of the building and the ultimate risks related to the failure of the retaining wall. So she makes those comments in her reference to us in relation to why she supports the demolition of the property and therefore the allowance for this development to go forward. So I take on board those comments. Again, the heritage wall, and I appreciate that this is a single-storey building, even though it looks two-storey because there's a mound of dirt that it sits on top of, and that a two-storey building on top of that will be more imposing than what currently sits on the site. Having said that, and I take heart in the comments made by the designer in that the owner actually explored the ability to actually retain the existing structure in place, but found that the structural integrity of the building was in a place where they didn't feel comfortable in developing that further. So have gone to their new ecologically, environmentally well-designed home that are in the plans that we see before us today. I guess that that building in itself I love, and I'm very comfortable with that on the basis of the commentary that have been made to us, and note the discretions that have come out, and I think one of the previous speakers has made in regards to the setbacks, and I guess they always concern me, and I guess that Mr Jones, who spoke first, I actually had the presence to visit their house a few weeks ago when this was first put forward as a DA application, and look at their deck and look at their beautiful view that they had over Launceston, and there is no doubt that that beautiful view in large part is going to disappear with the development of the second townhouse. My concern would be it would have been greater for that house to have been lowered to enable everybody to enjoy the benefits of that. The setbacks from the back boundary have been measured and they were set under performance criteria, which I think have been well outlined as to why they're acceptable, both side, front and rear setbacks, to explain why those setbacks actually fit within the performance criteria. Unfortunately, we don't have a purview over our view. We don't actually control our views anywhere, so wherever we buy or build, we need to have a view on what's beside us and what might actually ultimately take place of those situations. So unfortunately, in relation to the Joneses, who I feel most sorry for because it's a beautiful balcony they've got out the back, that they're going to lose a significant part of their view. But the setbacks in relation to overshadowing and things like that, I think have been ably demonstrated in the report given by the officer. So I commend the work that's been done in relation to it, because it's not a difficult, it's not an easy assessment to make in these things where you're on a hill and there's sort of all sorts of different shapes and sizes that you've actually got to construct the house into. But in this case, I think that the application has been appropriately determined, and I'll be supporting it today.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
I largely agree with the words that have come before me. I think we can all agree that there's a significant heritage interest in this property, but for me also it's the bluestone wall. I believe that's unique. I think it's so important in that part of the street that people recognise that they mark their lives against it. So to make sure that's safe and it can continue for many years to come, I think is of imperative importance. But also I'd just like to comment that we don't get to reject a DA based on subjectivity until we find one that we like. That's simply not how the planning scheme works. We've got a proposal before us, we have a developer before us. We have plans that have been signed off by our heritage officer, which I think is incredibly important here. And we have a planning department who have run all of the lenses over it that they need to, and they are in favour of this development. So I agree that the setbacks for the neighbour on that top side, it's going to be heartbreaking for them, there's no doubt about it. They are going to lose some of their open space, the way they live in that house is going to be changed. But I truly hope that they can find a way to be able to still enjoy it into the future once this development has gone ahead, and I will be supporting it today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, looked at that this morning. That wall is a large feature of Charles Street. It will be a massive job to pull that down and repair all the footings. Massive job. It was, when we looked at it, all the old rocks, 150 years old, are going to be used as much as possible, which is great. I will be supporting this. One problem I've got is the people losing their view, but we can't do anything about a view in Launceston. It's a pity, because a view means a lot to a house. It takes value off them when they lose the view. But in this case, because we can't do anything about it, I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walk, question? Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just like to ask our planning officers or the heritage officer if they're here, and I don't believe they are, under what listings is the property currently situated, and what protections those various listings afford the property?
Thank you. General Manager, or who's going to answer that? No, go ahead. Yep. Thank you. Duncan.
Thank you very much. The property itself is listed under the local heritage list incorporated in our planning scheme, and its protection as such is afforded by the provisions of the scheme in the Heritage Code, and that's the code that was addressed by our heritage officer in her report.
Thank you. Any other speakers or questions?
Another question, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Walker.
There seems to have been some discrepancy over the date of the building in question, everything from the 1880s through to the middle of the 1800s. Do we have now a specific date that we think that this building must have existed? And the reason I ask the question being is I do believe that the older the building is, and I know that, you know, one person was talking about a 150-year-old building, well, it might be a 170-year-old building. It brings it in line to a point where it's one of the oldest buildings, residential buildings in Launceston. So just wondering if we have some clarity around what we think may be the age of the building.
Thank you. Is that Duncan or Richard? Richard.
There has been some different commentary around the date of the building. The 1880 date used by the assessing planner in his report came off the government list website. The heritage experts are largely in agreement in the sense that there appears to be a range, or it's not there doesn't appear to be a precise date that everybody can agree on, but it certainly appears, and I'll just quote the latest advice that we have, is that it first appeared on the roll in 1865, but that was the first roll, so it could well have been around before that. And there appears to be some agreement between the heritage people that it would have been sometime before that, in the 10 or 15 years before that. So something around that date, but there's no precise date I can give you because that was pre the electoral rolls, etc., etc.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, there's certainly been, some conjecture about that, which does concern me that we're assessing a building.
Are you speaking now, or another question?
I'm going to ask another question.
Yep. All right,
Thank you. It just does give me some concern that we're assessing a building that we don't know the age of. When it comes to the building structure, its integrity, the engineer's report, what would be the requirement for a building such as this that obviously has significant cultural heritage as part of our built environment? What would be the requirement for such a building for us to trigger a conservation management plan be investigated to actually see what could be salvaged or indeed whether the building could be retained? Thank you. Richard.
Ultimately, the planning department takes the advice of our heritage officer, and that's based on a number of factors. And the heritage officer assesses those factors and makes essentially a judgment call on what level of information is required over and above what's coming with the application. If the heritage officer, or if we believe that the information is satisfactory to make a decision, then that's to make a recommendation, and that's what we do. If we feel like there's more, and it does depend on the circumstances of the case and the development.
Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Many of the representations reference issues to do with the right-of-way. What has happened in recent weeks that makes us feel confident that those issues and issues contained within representations has since been dealt with?
Thank you. Who's that? Duncan, is it?
Yeah, thank you again. The relevant property owners adjoining the right-of-way, those who actually have rights over that laneway, they had a meeting, we understand, last Friday where they discussed the various issues in regard to the existence of a gate and how the whole right-of-way will work. And they're understanding that they have reached an agreement amongst themselves about how they can resolve that issue. So for the residents for whom the right-of-way exists, there is no problem.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have great difficulty supporting a demolition order on a building that we're still not sure of the age of. I understand that someone has bought this property, maybe with the intention of knocking it down and building a newer building, maybe not. But nonetheless, they bought a property that is of high heritage significance, regardless of what their intentions were. That has to be noted and has to be acknowledged by this council. As a council, we take pride in Launceston's built heritage. Here's an opportunity with a building that we can reasonably say is at least 170 years old, to make some efforts towards preserving that, and yet it would appear that it's a fait accompli that that building will disappear from the landscape, to be replaced by a contemporary building, no matter how well it's built. That has nothing to do with the fact that we are losing, potentially losing a significant heritage building in a significant heritage precinct. A new building won't complement that precinct. It will be something that jars in that precinct. There's no doubt about that. Of course, there are other buildings in that area. That's no reason to be building more contemporary buildings when we have a building that already exists there. Now we come to an engineer's report that part of this assessment has been based on, provided by the proponent. It's not a report that was looking necessarily at ways to preserve the building. It was looking at ways to justify the removal of that building, and it certainly can find them. Of course, we had a similar situation, as someone mentioned, with the old supply mill store down in Canal Street at the back of the C.H. Smith. For months, for years, we were told that this building is beyond repair. It cannot be repaired and it needs to go. That was the justification that was used. That's what certain engineers' reports said to us. But surprise, surprise, the building still stands. The building has been repaired. The building's being used. It too was missing most of its roof. It was missing, parts of its original form. They've been replaced and repaired. So I have no doubt, even though I have not seen inside this building for a very long time in Charles Street, I have no doubt that efforts could be made to retain, if not all of the original heritage of that building, at least a part of it. But I see no effort that's being made on that part. And that worries me that here we are with a chance to preserve a significant building in our cultural built heritage, and there seems no will to explore any other possibility, whether it is having an assessment done, a conservation assessment done on the building, whether it is just being able to put this aside for a short while until we talk about other alternatives for retaining parts of the building. That's not on the agenda today. And that is, not just disappointing to me, but obviously a lot of other people who do appreciate our built heritage. Obviously, I won't be supporting this motion today. I would like to think that the proponent, after hearing some of the representations, might reconsider removing this building. But obviously they'll be under no obligation to. And it sends a message to other developers to look around for any slightly dilapidated buildings in Launceston and say, well, that one can go too. It's not on the State Heritage list, therefore it's not of no importance. Now, we all know there are buildings that aren't on the State Heritage list that are of importance. And here is our opportunity to say, let's go back to the drawing board with this. Let's work with the developers. Let's find a way to preserve a part of this heritage for future, to help maintain the precinct, the streetscape, and send a message that we can have both. We can have developments, we can have townhouses, but I'm sure most people have seen examples where it has been done, where you can marry existing heritage with modern development and have a successful result. So I'd implore my fellow councillors to not support this development application today, and for the council...
Your time is up. Do you want an extension? Will someone move an extension? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Sauer, moved and seconded. All those in favour? That's carried. You now have an extension.
Thank you, Mayor. For council to work fastidiously to finding that type of solution that preserves our heritage precincts. I mean, this is one that is a future precinct in our heritage plans, and yet by the time we get to it, this cottage won't be there. And to also satisfy the developer's need to modernise, to build, to make a larger dwelling, to make a more contemporary dwelling. These things can be done, but not through this present development application. And so I do implore my fellow councillors to reject this development application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor has a question.
Thanks, Mayor. We had a question earlier that we referenced in the response that would come up during the debate with regard to the wall, the ownership of the wall, the maintenance and risks associated with the wall. Is that something of relevance to the DA before us with regard to ownership, maintenance and risk?
Thank you. General Manager? Or,
no, so these walls and that one in particular is certainly not under Council's control. We don't own it, and therefore there is no responsibility for us to be able to undertake works in that regard. So.
Mayor, another question with regard to the local listing. Is the wall listed? Is the address listed? Or is the house and the wall individually listed on the local listing.
Thank you. Is that Richard?
In this case, I believe it's the whole site.
Thank you. Appreciating that the heritage planner isn't here and you may not know the answer to this, what happens to the rigour, I guess, of that listing when one significant component of it is demolished, removed, taken away?
The listings can be modified to include or exclude certain things, and that's not unusual. In the default situation would be the entire site, but for very large sites, the actual heritage significance can be described more significantly. I would imagine that once this flows through, if this is approved and gets built, that would happen to a future listing.
So that was my next question, Mayor. In terms of the listing, if indeed a vote is carried today that sees the demolition of the structure that's there, note in condition 15 to protect the wall and the restoration of the same, what will be the status of the listing at the moment that the vote is carried, 14 days after, but most importantly, between the period of demolition and reassessment of the site and the listing without or with, either without any structure and importantly with a new structure?
The site remains listed until it's not listed anymore or the listing's varied. So in principle, whilst there may well be a discrepancy between the descriptions for an interim period until the listing catches up, the site would remain listed until such time as the listing is in place. The decision today won't alter the fact that the site is listed in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? Question first, thank you.
Just a question that occurred to me is the difference between the Launceston heritage listing and the, I think you call it a local heritage listing, and the state heritage listing. What's the difference between the two, and perhaps even examples of what a property might be that was state listed as compared to something that might appear on a local listing?
Richard.
Properties listed at a state level, there's a Historic Cultural Heritage Act in Tasmania, and that gives the state the power to list things that are important on a state level, and that they can then include things on that list, and then that gives them jurisdiction over the heritage, or what happens to that from a development and works point of view going forward. And they have a separate development assessment process where you need a permit from them under that act. The planning scheme, or the Land Use and Planning and Approvals Act, requires the council to also consider heritage things of importance at its level. Now, quite often at the moment, there's an overlap between state and local listings, and there's a dual assessment. So this one, and it's quite common in Launceston for them to be a dual listing, for them to be state and heritage listing the same property. This one isn't state and local, this is locally listed only, which suggests that it's not deemed to be sufficiently important to be listed at the state level. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, Councillor Walker, question.
As far as the planning approval process goes, how long do we have in order to approve this development, i.e. could this be delayed for 2 weeks while
18th
council
of June.
sort?
18th of June.
Beg your pardon?
It says in our notes 18th of June.
That it's actually due for?
Deemed approval.
Deemed to be approved. Okay, so in that case, can I, so we can't, there's no way that we can delay it, even seeking a heritage assessment, independent conservation management plan would not delay the process? The question being, if council were in favour of a conservation management plan for this building, would that delay the planning approval process?
Richard.
If council were to seek to engage a heritage consultant, undertake the work, and then report that back to council, it would clearly delay the decision making. It could be months. By the time you've engaged someone, they've done the work, written it up, reported it back to council, and we got it on another agenda, I would imagine it would be months. So yes, it would delay decision making.
Just to follow up that, though, without consent of the applicant to extend the time for the council to make consideration, we would be opening ourselves up to a deemed approval and then subsequent costs for any associated actions. So again, it's not a decision that's available to council with the current set of circumstances that we have.
Thank you. Thank you.
So in which case then we could not amend the motion to require a conservation management plan be done before building works commence.
Richard.
The application is to permit demolition of the building. Seeking a conservation management plan would serve no purpose if it was approved for demolition. So the question here is, does council want to permit the development or not? And if it doesn't want to permit it, it should refuse the development rather than seek additional information, which is not an option at this point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Councillor Harris, you wish to close?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my fellow councillors for your comments and questions. They've been, I guess it shows the passion that each of us has for our city. As Mr Jamieson said, this development application is for us to say yes or no on. Either we approve it or we don't. It is the only application we have before us. We can't put a different spin on it. We can't tell the operator we'll approve it if you do this. The application is as it is. So it is in fact for us to approve or not approve here today. Everyone that has, well, most of those that have spoken have talked about the wall as being the significant part of the, I guess, streetscape that they feel is most worthy of retention, and in fact that's why we've added the condition for the bluestone wall that the repairs and restoration works to the existing bluestone wall must reuse as much as the existing stone as practical and may result in the walls visually compatible with the existing walls to the satisfaction of the manager city development. So I think for most people in Launceston this will say the walls will be rebuilt, they will look mostly like they do now, they will be built out of the heritage stone, and I think that is to be commended because it will retain that feel at that part of Charles Street. However, we will be approving a new building sitting on top. In fact, two new buildings. And as Councillor Mackenzie said, I do feel for those who will lose their view. But as Councillor Spencer said, unfortunately, no one has a right to a view. It is simply something that you have to learn to live with. And in inner city, it is very true that we'll see more and more developments on these small pieces of land. So I encourage each of you to support the motion as it is, as amended, and allow the developer to get on with the job of building a new unit or two on top of a restored bluestone wall in Charles Street. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's one against, the rest is for. The motion is carried. We move on to 9.2. We do have a speaker for 9.2, Susie Kai.
Mayor, councillors, thank you again for the opportunity to address you. It's important for a family like ours, particularly with young children growing up, to have a private outdoor space where we can relax, play and enjoy the fresh air. This is why the requirement for private open space was written into the residential provision of the city's planning scheme. Living on a small property that also accommodates our business provides limited opportunities to develop private open space, which is why we have proposed our restaurant's car park for this purpose. Granting this permit will formalise a use for this space that's been taking place informally for years without any impact on the amenity of surrounding properties. This is the only reason for our application. It's not, as some have suggested, to make it more difficult for the proposed Gorge Hotel to proceed. Regardless of whether you accept this or not, as a planning authority, you need to put aside your feelings about the proposed hotel. Neither planning law nor the planning scheme allows you to consider how our application might impact a hypothetical future application on another title. Our application must be considered on its own merit, and the report written by Council planning staff clearly shows that our application has merit. Concerns have been raised by representatives about the parking demand generated by our business, and this has been addressed by a condition that continues to provide 5 parking spaces while the restaurant is open for diners. We now rarely have dine-in customers, and our takeaway customers visit briefly to pick up their orders and generate very little demand for parking. The little demand they do generate is easily met by an abundance of on and off-street parking options in the area, and there are far more such options than the representatives would have you believe. I would like to thank the Council planning staff for an excellent report which comprehensively addresses all the relevant standards in the planning scheme. I urge the councillors to support the planning officer's very well-reasoned recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. So 9.2, moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Mackenzie?
I think Mrs. Kai said it all, to be quite frank. I mean, I think the reality of it is there are 5 car spaces at the property. 5 car spaces will continue to be at the property. As they've said, informally they've been using the property for private open space, and I think as we saw today there's a basketball hoop and plants and various bits and pieces that are outside the property now. So all this is doing is formalising something that's already happening. Our officers have quite rightly said that the two can link together on the basis that provided the 5 car spaces are available at the times that their business is open for use, then they need to be available for car parking rather than private use. And so even if the hours of operation change from what they currently are, the permit states that they need to have those 5 car spaces available at that point in time. So I see no reason why we shouldn't support this today.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and I just add my voice to Councillor Mackenzie's support. It's all there in the report, but I hope that people at home listening take on board the wonderful representation made by Mrs. Kai in arguing that we should consider what is in front of us, Mr. Mayor, not what could be, not hypothetical. Very happy to support.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we move on now. 10.1, Mayor's announcements. Yeah, just a couple of things I do want to mention. As was mentioned earlier in the meeting, that we did have the Launceston Walk Against Elder Abuse. I thank Councillor Mackenzie was there as well for coming along for that, and it was well attended and a very important issue for obviously for many in our community who are elderly who do get abused, and whether that's financial or physical or whether that's emotional, it's a lot of different reasons they get abused, and it does happen. So we need to continue to make people aware of that, but also to be a voice against that where we can as well. And then great news on Sunday for those of you that are keen football supporters, there's a few in the room, that it's going to be a great game of football right here in this city with Essendon playing Hawthorn, and it's been sold out. So if you want a ticket, it's already sold out. It's absolutely fantastic. It really shows you, and I really want to thank the citizens of Launceston and beyond for supporting this sort of game, because that's really making a statement to the AFL. And I think it's a great result, and it's going to be a fantastic game. And I'm not sure who's going to win, but we'll worry about that on Sunday. And that's it from me. Thank you. Councillor reports. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one from myself today. 2 weeks ago today, I had the pleasure of representing yourself at the final night of the Launceston competitions. It was the music section, and to celebrate all the achievements of the entrants in this year's competitions. Obviously, the competitions were not held last year, so it was wonderful to be able to stage them again this year. And the calibre of talent from performers right across the region, from schools, individuals and adults, was just fantastic, as referenced by the adjudicator, who had a wonderful time. The Launceston competitions sincerely thanked the Council for their ongoing support with regard to events funding that enable the genres that collectively take over a month, with dance, drama and singing music at a variety of venues around the city, and they wanted that passed on.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, just in my role at the Launceston Airport, just wanting to let everybody know that we have an interim CEO, a man called Shane O'Hare, who's joined us, who comes originally out of Melbourne Airport, so he's got good background in the industry, and I think will add a lot to the organisation over the next few months while he's acting in that role. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to get out of Melbourne to physically locate himself down here since he took up the appointment, but hopefully that's coming soon.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Questions from councillors? No. Questions without notice are there. With notice are there. Heritage Advisory Committee, 13.1. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Walker. Seconded, Councillor McKenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Walker?
Just briefly, I know that councillors have been updated on the Albert Hall renewal project, but so too was the Heritage Advisory Committee recently at their last meeting, and that's obviously, you know, a highly important building for all of Launceston, so that's eagerly being followed by the committee and of course by councillors. The selection of committee members, community representatives, Dr Anne Neal, Ms Margot Smart and Mr Les Pens was ratified by Council at a previous meeting. I will say that we have a very well-informed, active and vibrant committee. And I think that's about all, I suppose, other than to mention the Heritage Awards, which is being further progressed for 2021, and it would appear that these events will be held sometime later in the third quarter of this year.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, I wasn't present at the last meeting as it was conflicting with a pedestrian bike committee meeting last time, so I had to sort of share my favours last meeting. So I'd like to thank Councillor Walker for taking on the chair's role. But I just thought it was worthwhile just looking at point 5 development application. Somebody asked a little bit about whether Heritage Advisory had seen the previous one of the previous items at Heritage Advisory Council. I think it's important to understand that this council, that this advisory group actually doesn't sort of send advice back to councillors in relation to what we should support and what we shouldn't support in relation to heritage advisory matters. They're there to form general opinions and give advice in regards to heritage matters in general. We undertook that where there were listed or there are heritage-related DAs that came across the council's desk, that all the Heritage Advisory Committee would be made aware of those by the Heritage Planner or Heritage Officer, so that they could at least put in representations if they felt it was necessary. Because the other big issue is with Councillor Walker and I sitting in there, we're somewhat compromised in having a conversation about what we should and shouldn't support in relation to a DA in a committee such as that. So just so you're aware that we send it out for information and it's left up to the individual members of the Heritage Advisory Council to make their own representations to Council in relation to heritage matters that are listed for decision.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just briefly, I wanted to say that I look forward to following the building materials library item through. I think that sounds like a really wonderful initiative, and I look forward to seeing how that develops over the next few meetings.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to close? No, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 14.1, Council Workshop Report. Is there someone happy to move that? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Councillor Soward, seconded. Wish to speak? Deputy Mayor? Councillor Soward? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We go on to, turn the page, 18.1, concessional entry. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Walker moved. Seconded Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker, you wish to speak to it?
Just to congratulate the continued work that's being done at the council with our council officers that are responsible for waste disposal facilities. You can see there a list of different organisations that have applied for and been successful for a concessional entry into our waste disposal centre. It's a difficult area. At the moment, if anything, people are creating more waste, they're consuming more, and whether it's packaging, whether it's used items or whatever, and these organisations listed are quite often the ones that end up being the recipients of these, either through donations, through managing premises where people live, and having to deal with the end result. Of course, these organisations are encouraged to reduce the amount of waste that they're taking to the tip face, and to find ways of recycling and all of those associated things. But it gets to a point where that becomes very difficult when you're dealing with some situations where there's contamination, or a certain amount of destruction and things like that. So I suppose that makes the whole process more difficult for the organisations. So I will just conclude by encouraging both the council and these organisations to work together to find different ways that we can sort and recycle waste and reduce our need for a waste facility. Of course, it's never going to go away. In fact, as I say, it's getting worse in some ways, but that is important for us to send that message to the community and to the producers as well, that we're the ones that end up receiving this stuff, so we need to find ways of sending that message back to reduce the waste.
Thank you. Councillor Harris? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Start with a couple of positives. I think the wonderful thing about this is that it's under budget. That's the first thing. The next thing is that there are clear examples, including organisations such as Self-Help, who are indicating demonstrable things that they're doing to reduce what it is that they're sending to landfill, and those things should be congratulated and applauded. And I guess the third thing is that this is another of the very many things that this council does to support community. It's a media release in this, I would think, because the amount of people that are impacted, the number of organisations that are supported and allowed to divert their funds to other ways to support their clients and other members of our community is considerable. $32,000 worth of support being diverted to other means and ways of supporting community. But I guess in terms of a continuous improvement, the officers list some very clear comments, and that is that the committee is recommending that all of the applicants meet with members of the sustainability team in order that they do not simply just copy and paste their application from previous years and see it as an entitlement, but rather that this is something that they are doing to improve the amount of things that are going to landfill. A byproduct of that is that they have more money to support our community. But it's not a right, it's not an entitlement, it is something that this council does in order to improve the rates of things that are going to landfill and in turn support those organisations to further enhance and support community. So commend the motion as outlined to the table.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm one of the new boys on the block in this committee. I like the way they did this to people on council they did it in stars 1, 2 and 3, and that's the way it was assessed, which is great. I think the main problem we've got, some of the stuff going to the tip face is building products, which is hundreds of tonnes of it, and I think it should be on building sites processed before it goes out to the tip face. Building bricks, there's timber and heaps of it, and that is taking a lot of our tip face. So I think that's where we can improve our waste. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure any of these charities are into building, but anyway.
No, but it's...
Anyone else to speak? Councillor Walker, you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried. Thank you. We go to 19.1, Rates and Charges Policy. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it?
This is just a function. The council has to regularly review its rates and emissions policy. And I think if you looked at the marked up version, there's only, I think, one area that there's a change, and that's on page 101, which is under rate emissions, where there's a slight change of wording to more clearly outline what we do.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, the budget for 21-22. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Soward. Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it?
Look, again, this is something we do each year. I think once we've worked out what our increase is going to look like, it then has to be put back into a rating model which reflects the rates per cents per dollar that we charge against various land use categories. And this is identified by what's in the papers in front of us. So I think you'll just find that it's just a matter of working backwards from the numbers that we increase the rates by.
Thank you. Councillor Soward? Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Spencer?
Just the one on the electricity, 19.4, I don't know if we're up that far. The budget's more for electricity and gas. Just wondering why that's happening when we're putting solar on everywhere. Oh, right, no, that's 19.4, yeah.
Yep. Any other speakers? We'll handle that later on 19.4, I think it is. No? Deputy Mayor.
Probably need to just say a couple of things, and that is that a considerable amount of work has been undertaken to bring us to this point, and that's not, that's not taken for granted. Considerable workshops, variety of different scenarios, variety of different modellings, variety of different charges looked at, considered, and certainly recognise the plethora of work that gets us to this fundamental point of the process.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we've got 19.3, annual plan. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, again, not wishing to make brevity of this. The reality of it is we have workshopped this on a number of occasions, and I guess that the annual plan is interrogated by councillors at workshops and various other things before we get to a final one that gets lodged before us today. So I think that really a lot of the hard work's already been done before we got here.
Thank you. Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 19.4, the budget for estimates. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
Yeah, and again, you can see at the beginning there the number of workshops that we've had where we've discussed relative issues associated with it. The budget's been sent out to the public for them to view and make comment on, of which we had 2 comments on, I think, which were dealt with at the last meeting. And we've arrived at a situation where we now need to formally sign off on the budget that's there. We're a very big business that turns over 115, $120 million a year. There are lots of expenses, and I guess you can go through there. Very difficult looking at it just from the individual line item to say what's gone in and what's gone out. And Councillor Spencer talked about the gas and electricity, and that's, I think, further detail down below where we've actually saved ourselves money in gas because we've now converted the swimming pool with the solar panels and things like that we put on top of the swimming pool, which has reduced our got costs, increased our electricity costs somewhat, but not significantly, and over time the payback's quite short period of time. So yeah, we've been through, I think, and discussed a lot of the numbers over a lot of meetings where we've interrogated and satisfied ourselves. And the difficulty with this year is when you're comparing it with 21, where we went through the COVID situation, is looking at a set of numbers and saying, oh, why isn't that the same or roughly the same as the one the year before? Is COVID has had impacts, some better and some worse in relation to the expenditure we've got. So that's why there are some anomalies in there. I think the officers have done a great job where they can to give us notes about why some of those variances have occurred. And they're sort of contained within the document. So I'm here to endorse the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. And as I usually say when we deal with this, straight away, for anyone who wonders what sort of work goes into this document, when you look at previous council consideration, here we are in June 2021 dealing with the statutory estimates for the year going forward, but we notice that work has already been undertaken back in October last year. And as I always say, it's a year-long process. So when we deal with this matter today, the hard-working team that deals behind the scenes with this will be head down. I'm sure they'll be looking forward to that, ready to do the next one. It's a significant piece of work. Just a couple of things I wanted to add to Councillor Mackenzie's detailed remarks. It's very easy for people to sit around when this hits the wonderful headlines in the news tomorrow that we've dealt with it and this is going to happen and these are going to be your rate increases and all the rest of it, without understanding where those costs go. And because of the time of year it is, end of financial year, there was some significant commentary on radio this week, not just about councils but about all sorts of things, and some things that need to be highlighted, Mr Mayor, that apply to us. For us as a council, when we do business, our costs, the things that we have to pay for, are always increasing. If we just said, OK, no, we're not going to put rates up, we're going to freeze everything, the costs and things that we pay, not just wages but other things, wages we know are growing very slowly, but other things are an increased cost to us. And we need to take that into account. The Deputy, in the previous, a couple of items ago, highlighted very, very clearly what this council does in the space of some remissions for some charities. We know, as we look across the city, Mr Mayor, there are some wonderful things, wonderful initiatives that this council support in all range of cultural and cultural activities. The physical activity spaces that this budget supports, the capital works undertaken. So when I stand up to speak to the annual budget, one of the things I always look at is, is there something in it for everyone? And there always is, because as Councillor Mackenzie said, this is a significant piece of work. It's not just done in the last couple of weeks. It's almost a year's worth of work before we present it around the table today. So, yep, we're a nice, easy target for people who want to say my rates have gone up X percent, I'm going to pay $30 more a year or whatever. The world will come to an end, but they're the same people who use the wonderful parks, who go to our wonderful theatre, who partake in all of the wonderful sport that happens out at Churchill Park, for instance. Use our amazing parks and facilities and walking tracks. So the last thing I wanted to add, Mr Mayor, again, and it's something that's not new, but the hard work of this council and its staff in having such a strong fiscal position was reflected last year in COVID, with all of the work after, in this financial year, the supports, the way we went forward, the wonderful way our rate staff helped people who are having a hard time. So that doesn't happen by accident. It happens through hard work and preparation. So I strongly support what's before us today. I want to acknowledge the hard work of all of our staff under the leadership of the CEO in presenting what's here today. I'll conclude my remarks, Mr Mayor, by saying that when this went out for public consultation, which when I first got onto council never used to happen, the previous General Manager, Mr Dobrinsky, initiated that. We had two responses that came back to council with some very meaningful suggestions. One very fulsome suggestion about parks. The other one, a person who also made some suggestions, a bit more brief in that nature, but two people out of our entire municipality have come back to us, which says to me, Mr Mayor, that the other 80-something thousand people who live here are obviously quite happy with what's in the document. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to make a couple of comments, and obviously some of them reference the item that we passed previously in 19.2 with regard to the 3.75% increase. And I just want to reference that the budget juxtaposed against the 3.75% increase, we should remind ourselves and the people of this great city that that comes after the rate freeze that was implemented in the previous 12 months as part of, as the Councillor Soward indicated, a very significant COVID response. So I also want to note that those measures and mechanisms, ability for people who are doing it tough, weren't just exercised during COVID, but they exist all of the time. And not making light of the fact that, you know, for some people, an increase of however much is a burden and an impact, that we have wonderful, wonderful opportunities for people to work with our council staff to be able to deal with that. I also want to reference the significant depreciation costs and note the significant works that are being undertaken in that space for future years. Things such as the UTAS Stadium and the way that that will have eventually an impact on our budget. And also want to reference the significant number of items, budget line items, whereby things that are regional in nature or things that impact a significant number of people are listed in the budget. Things like Northern Tasmania Development, things like NRM North, things like Tamar Regional NRM, things like Tourism Northern Tasmania, NTCA and Theatre North and others. So there are a variety of things, as Councillor Soward referenced, in terms of there being something in the budget for everyone. There are also contributions and things that we've determined are significant and important for this municipality, which admittedly may not just impact every single person, but in their totality, the impact, the return, the benefit that those things provide to the whole of the municipality are seen as unquestionably important and thus things that we contribute to. And I think that's really important, and probably we'll unpack that further later on. But in terms of the budget, I want to sincerely say thank you to the staff again, as Councillor Mackenzie did, for the work that gets us to this point, and importantly the work over the last 12 to 18 months with regard to COVID. I'm really proud of the way that we responded to COVID and through the measures that were implemented, and obviously now with our long-term financial plan and the efforts that have gone into that, we're able to see a 3.75% increase, whereby other councils perhaps are increasing even more.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie. Oh, Councillor Spencer, was it? Sorry.
Just want to bring up one about the 19.4 about the vehicles and fleet replacement. I know for fact Tas Water and other councils send all their vehicles to Hobart and auction them, and they get 15 to 20% more for them than selling them to a dealer. I wonder if we can look at, I spoke to the CEO about this before, whether it's worth trying that with some of the vehicles we sell.
CEO.
Give consideration to it.
You'll give consideration to it.
Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close.
If you think about moving motions, you can pick up things you've got to say. And obviously Cody was very important to me early on as my aging member, I think. But I just want to take it up. Councillor Gibson, I think, hinted to it in his comments, but I think that what's really important about our annual budget, it actually fits into a longer term financial budget. And if you look there at where we've done things like we've actually pulled out little items like Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery and find out what it actually costs us, $5.9 million. You've got your PIPA, sorry, Bill Park Interest Precinct Authority, $3.6 million. This is a net cost to us as a council. And these are the things that I know the CEO has been working assiduously on to try and rectify that situation, because they're largely used for the benefit of the region. And I think the things that are put into the long-term financial plan are designing for us to get into a better position where these things won't be costing the ratepayers of Launceston anywhere near the amount of money that it's currently costing. So I think it's always good to see the highlighted numbers that come out in there because they're actually quite significant. And I guess it's us providing to a larger rate-paying base than the ratepayers. So I'll just make that comment as I sit down.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 19.5, the City of Launceston 4-year delivery plan. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Harris, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor McKenzie, thank you. Councillor Harris, you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, this is, I guess, the rolling 4-year delivery plan, that we not only have an annual plan, but we also have a plan looking forward for the next 4 years, and this is the plan that we've got for that period, up to 23-24.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie?
Just to highlight, I think that this is again another innovation of the CEO to actually have something in place where we actually deliver something in the council term. And that's what the 4-year delivery plan is about, saying, okay, we've got things that go on for years beyond the term of this council, but over the term of this council we have an opportunity to actually set our sights on what we want to achieve, and therefore we have something that we can go back and measure whether we were successful or not in doing so. So I think it's a great initiative.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.6, the budget amendments. Councillor McKenzie moved. Councillor Harris seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
Look, I think, as I've said previously with these things, the officers do a great job in sort of explaining to us what these reports are and give us explanations as to why they happen. They're just things that we need to do. From a council perspective, we need to actually highlight them in a council meeting so that the public know what's happened.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
No, I need to say that sometimes we're moving money from capital to operational budgets and vice versa. And I did note that there's a couple of interesting ones there of the Youngtown Oval, $557,000 for a facility upgrade, and also some Relbia and Glenwood Road safety improvements to around $240,000, which I'm sure the ratepayers will appreciate down that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie to close.
I just did note one that did get stuck in there was just in regards to the environmental health team who have purchased a sound level meter so that we can actually do our own, resolve our noise complaints, determine noise regulation. So I think that's actually a very useful thing for us to actually have.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.7. Budget. Moved Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie? Thank you. Councillor Dawkins. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present, and that is carried. So 19.8, public interest disclosure procedure. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Dawkins. Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you wish to speak to it?
Well, just in terms of transparency, I mean, there is a clear example of the way that it works in terms of looking to have the approval come from the council rather than senior staff. It's documented.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we go 19.9, delegation from Council to Chief Executive Officer. Moved Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I do, just given we had a question about us having delegated everything to the CEO earlier in the meeting, just to explain that this is actually in relation just to the issues relating to the building, Local Government Building and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1993, and things that are certainly from the point of view of a sensible way to deal with things is to delegate things that are operational in nature to the general manager, to the CEO. So I think it's important that when we respond to Mr. Bain, so we've done it again, that it really only relates to the matters that are in the recommendation, not the whole of the whole of the council's policies.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
I'd just like to recognise that this is part of an ongoing review of all manner of delegations and legal items, which the wonderful team have been really vigorously undertaking, and that is noted and acknowledged, and this is another in the suite of things that continue to come before us.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move now on to 19.10. Taswater proxy. Appointment of a proxy. Moved Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Other than as per the report, it's simply so that if the Mayor and the CEO are unavailable to attend the Taswater meeting, we have a proxy in the Chief Financial Officer to attend on their behalf.
Thank you. That's because they have their meetings often on a Thursday. Councillor Soward, wish to speak? Any other speakers? Sorry? No. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Then we move on to 20.1. Councillor Soward will leave the room. 20.1, Councillor McKenzie moved. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I do, Mayor, and again, the urban design framework is just another activity in the suite of activities going on at UTAS at the moment to advance their campus development in the northern precinct. And I think it's important to note when you look there at the second paragraph of the report where it says the urban design framework has been developed by UTAS in collaborative manner with the council and the community, being provided various opportunities for input and feedback. So now the UDAF has been finalised, the council has been requested to consider for its formal endorsement. So it's not as if this has arrived on the doorstep today. It's been socialised on a number of occasions. It's been workshopped with our officers, given they border our land. And I know that workshopping will continue on into the future in regards to how it interrelates with us and other members of the community to ensure that it actually impacts positively on the UTAS area and fits in well with the people who are in and around the same, in and around the urban development area.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Councillor Soward re-enters the room. We go on to 20.2. Do we have a mover for 20.2, the Great Regional City Challenge? Move Councillor Soward. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Councillor Soward, wish to speak?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Only briefly, the report says it all, but a couple of things. I'm sure that everyone in this room shares some empathy with Mr Tilbury, who took on this initiative, and then bang, we went straight into COVID. So that obviously created all sorts of problems. Notwithstanding that, the report spells out very, very clearly, some wins, some positive things in a range of areas that have been undertaken. The only other thing I wanted to add, and I know I spoke to it at the time, it spells out very clearly in the report that it's been made clear that councils aren't if you like, a recurrent source of funding, and that's been made very, very clear, which is why the amount of money that's been recommended in this item today has been set at that particular amount. So well done to Mr Tilbury and all those involved, and we look forward to seeing some great things continue in that space. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you. I think the Greater Regional City Challenge has been a success in its first year. I note that we specifically donated $20,440 in the first round. This time we'll be donating $5,000, which is obviously a reduction, but most importantly, we will continue to provide Council's Finance Department to help them manage the funds for this particular thing, which I think is done in kind and very worthwhile for us to do that, to maintain how other people's money is being distributed in a fair and equitable way to make sure there's some probity around what was going on. So I congratulate Mr Tilbury in his efforts in this area and look forward to the second round of grant applications, I'm sure.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, just think, again, I'm happy to continue to support it, and I know the only issue that sort of came out in the review was simply in relation to some matters that were actually funded that actually almost seemed to be in conflict or doing things that we were already doing as a council. I'll just look at a fix for the Tamar River, which is something that we've been working on ad infinitum through Tempt and various things like that. And I guess that's the only issue that I'd like to be able to manage a little better so that we don't end up funding things that are actually already being funded by other means through the council. So I'm not sure that we can control it, but it's just one of those things I think was just the only thing I didn't like about what the outcomes came.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Mackenzie. I do have some reservations about this program. I do think there's some double dipping. I think there's some cross purposes at play here. You know, as I said in a previous workshop, I can't decide whether funding the Fix the Mud campaign is a fantastic act of democracy or something that really goes against what it is that our best evidence shows. And we can't control it. Once we allocate the funds, of course, it's not up to us who gets that money. But it is up to a board of people who promote that idea and then go out to the community to vote on, who don't have any gender balance, there's no diversity in that board. I worry that they speak to that but don't address it. So, you know, I wouldn't like to see this come before council too many more times in this current model. I will support it today. I didn't support it last time, but I do think that we have to be a little concerned that there are a number of organisations that could be funded and are funded through our event sponsorship rounds who get another go at it. So I'll support it today, but not again.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. And look, I certainly appreciate the recommendation that comes from the officer, from the CEO, rather than the $20,000 that was asked of us. I think for me, what this agenda item references is that if you're a not-for-profit group who needs a treasurer or some assistance, then the council's CFO could be available to assist. So write to the CEO, and you never know what could happen in that regard. But certainly appreciate the work that's been undertaken. Agree with the comments of Councillor Dawkins with regard specifically to the double dipping. I do believe that's an issue. I also acknowledge that a number of these things were happening anyway, admittedly through a populist vote opportunity. Some of them received some additional funds to enable them to be bigger or seemingly better. But definitely I think it's noted there's a number of in-kind supporters, that's acknowledged. I think, as was our intent when we provided the funding for the initial year, the trial and the study, that this would have to become something that was less reliant on local government, and this sends a message that that is the case.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I was another who did not vote to support this initially. I have my difficulties. I appreciate what the organisation is not just attempting to do, is actually doing, and it's giving light to people's ideas, and I think that's a great thing. It's possibly something that the council can learn from in that respect, about how you bring out ideas that might not even be feasible, but that people want to share and people want to explore, and sometimes that does involve money. I'm sure the council's, reluctant to spend money on things that are destined to fail, and indeed this is what will happen with some, if not, many of the ideas that have been supported through this process with the regional city challenge. So that's the dilemma there. On top of that, as a consequence, we end up with some ideas that might be in conflict with council policy or might be in conflict with areas that the council has already explored. So that is probably the area that needs improvement, where if we're to be giving money to this, now I know that we also provide financial expertise, but it would appear that we're not providing necessarily the liaison that expresses that an idea might be in direct conflict with council policy. No, I'm not against, criticism. If someone still says, I don't agree with council policy, fair enough. But should we be funding that actively? I have my questions about that. I don't disagree with what's being attempted here. It's what's feasible. Sometimes ideas that may appear to be common sense initially are quite often ideas that are not feasible in any way, shape or form, and that's why they haven't occurred previously. So certainly in two minds, $5,000 isn't a lot of seed money for a program like this. I suppose similar to Councillor Dawkins, I would not like to see it as a recurring expense for council, and yet, strangely, I'm supportive of the general notion that they are trying to, incubate ideas. So we'll see where that goes, and we'll see how I vote, I suppose.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Soward, closing.
Nothing to add, Mr. Mayor.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So there's 2 against, the rest are 4. That is carried. Now go on to City Prom Review. We do have a speaker for City Prom Review, Mr. Basil Fitch.
It's different to when I was here last, John.
You've got to go near the microphone. Just.
Thank you. On this issue, I'm very much involved in it because the manner in which it's been done. City Prom, in about 1988, came to the council, of which I was a member, and they wanted to stop people going to Kmart and to Kings Meadows. And we gave them the right to collect the money and strike a rate, which you know all about, so I won't elaborate on that. It was voluntary, a lot of volunteers involved, and of course, over the time, it's disintegrated, no question about it. Shops have, instead of stopping shops closing, stopping shops, they've closed them all up and they're no longer a viable, in my opinion, a viable people involved. The ratepayers we were very much against any money being paid by the ratepayers to what was known as the Brisbane Street Barons back in that time. And I still am. And I'm very surprised that you've got that in amongst the recommendations here today. Recently, last week, in the press was a notice, apart from Harvey Norman, I might add, and it was related to 52% mortgage stress. Well, when you take 52% mortgage stress, and then we all start looking at one another around a table like this.
Can you round it out and finish off, please?
When you look around, well, then of course we've got to make sure that the money spent is spent wisely. I asked, why haven't you notified the people that you wish to reintroduce into the CBD or into the scheme. Why haven't they been told? That is a cardinal sin, an absolute cardinal sin.
Thank you. Your time is up.
You should know.
Yeah, but your time is up. Thank you.
The last bit is right. A market. I spoke to this, Your Worship, at election night about a market. I'm very strong on it, but that is one of the salvations of this city. It started as market, was rural all around it, and that's the one, the key, that could bring this city back to life. But I'd like to talk to you all about that.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got the item before us, 20.4. Move, Councillor Mackenzie.
Slightly amended version, which I'll just bring that up. So I've just added the words in item 2. Agrees to establish a working group between CityProm, Council and the Launceston Chamber of Commerce to complete the reforms identified in recommendation 1. The outcomes of the working group are to be presented to Council for endorsement prior to implementation by June 2022. So it means that the work... Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It's moved. That's seconded by Councillor Soward. So you wish to speak to it now, Councillor?
I do. Thank you. And look, the NOAA group were employed to do it on the basis of a motion, I think, put forward by Councillor Soward many months ago. It's taken some time, and COVID was part of the problem as to why the report took long to get to us. Over the years, I guess I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with CityProm in relation to what it's delivered to the city, what it delivered to the improvement of Launceston. I think an important part of it, and where I get the importance of this, is town centres are regarded as vitally important, it's in the report, in boosting local economies and activating communities. The broader economic factors that are impacting on retailing in Launceston include low population growth, and there's a number that are listed within the recommendation. I guess my sense is that if we don't have an activated CBD, we really have a struggle as a city. Retailers in the city are compromised by many different things. Some of them are not good at what they do. Some of them are compromised by the fact that they're competing against the internet for services, and I think if you read the Australia's Post statistics, they're only making money because of their parcel delivery that they do around the countryside. So the whole demographic and the way that we buy and sell things has changed significantly. But having said that, if you look around our CBD, we've actually got some great retailers who have been there for a long, long time and been very successful. Routley's is the one that quickly comes off the top of my head, but there are others in and around the city that have survived and thrived by the fact that they provide a great product. The one thing that I always have, and I've put forward to this council before, and I wrote a paper on it many months ago, is the person who seems to be missing from the conversation is the person who actually owns the property. We always talk about the retailers who are operating within the space. But we don't actually talk to the people who actually have to let the spaces out, and are they letting them out at a viable rate and things like that. So I hope that this review will actually bring some of the actual owners of the property into the conversation as we get closer to making a final outcome, because I think they are part of the solution as to where we go to with this whole thing. Now, we often get criticised for what we do or don't do in and around the city, what we do or don't do with malls. I mean, I look at Civic Square and I think most people would see that as being a raving success, whereas we were further down the road and we see the mall and they say that is not so successful. What a lot of people don't understand is that the mall, in part, let's take Tigers out of the conversation, but doesn't have a lot in it, and largely because the retailers didn't want a lot in it because they didn't want people not seeing their shops. So there are a number of things that have to be taken into account. The Launceston City Council doesn't run the CBD. What we are here to do is facilitate things to ensure that we get the best outcomes for the CBD and all other parts around the city that we preside over. And one of the things that we need to make sure is if we can sit there and say, are there things that we can do to make it more attractive? As somebody said, you don't make money out of people having pavements, nice pavements to walk on. But the trouble is people won't walk on them if they're not nice pavements. But the reality of it is we've got so much within this city, and I really believe with our City Heart project we're getting there, but we need to get everybody on plane in regards to what it is that we want this city to look like in the CBD. It is a huge attractor, and I think if you look at the Grimmer report, they'll say you can go to Kings Meadows and you can buy something. If you want a pair of shorts, you can get a pair of shorts. But if you want a particular pair of shorts, you can't get a particular pair of shorts. You can only get the pair of shorts that's there. Whereas you come to Launceston, into the CBD, you actually have an opportunity of choice. You can go around several retailers and find that I can buy this pair of shorts or that pair of shorts or another pair of shorts in different places. So I think it's certainly something that I am significantly supportive of, is a great CBD. You know, we're intertwining lots of things now by bringing residential into the city, which gives vibrance with people. The UTAS development that we've done out at Inveresk, or well, what we've done, the UTAS is doing out at Inveresk, is there, and it's actually going to bring people closer to the city centre, which is actually going to give more people the ability to walk in and around our city. Now, I've digressed well off the topic, but it's just in general terms about the CBD and why it's important. It's a really important part for us to support. Now, whether it stays within, and I guess the NOAA report gave us various options, and we've ended up with the one that we should be putting across the larger rate base. I'm now looking forward to the working group to go back and do some work on this and come back and report to us about how that might work and how that's going to be fair amongst the citizens of Launceston. So by putting that additional little bit of extra in the bit of it, it actually gives us a final say in a few months' time once this working group has come back to us. It also
Thank you. Your time's up. Do you need an extension?
Only about 2 seconds.
Okay, I'll let you go.
It also gives the opportunity for those that are represented to us about what we should or shouldn't be doing, a chance to put their input in as well.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I am really happy to be able to speak on this today. When I brought the notice of motion to council some time ago, one of the first things I said in my remarks was that I didn't have a view as to what that recommendation or what would come back, because as I think I said then, it was around about 20 odd years since there'd been any review of the way CityProm had operated. Mr Fitch, in his remarks today, as a long-serving alderman at the time of the city, explained to us how CityProm started and the purpose it served. And I think he said it was born out of the need to stop people going to Kmart, which at the time was a massive thing in this city. You know, a big retailer on the fringe of the city, very different to what we'd had. As we've seen things evolve over time, things have changed in retail. And one of the reasons I wanted that review, Mr Mayor, to be done was that I think as a council, it's prudent on us, as our motto is, progress with prudence, to make decisions based on evidence-based data. And not only, so we got two for the price of one almost, not only did we get this wonderful review, but alongside it, the work of a highly regarded academic, Dr Grimmer. And those two reviews complemented each other. Dr Grimmer shone a light even, on areas that were different to the review that was undertaken. There was a little bit of overlap, but it showed, as Mr Fitch touched on and others have touched on, things have changed in the centre of the city with the way people do business. Now, I'm not advocating that as a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's change. In some ways, it's a good thing. Any person can sit at home, Mr Mayor, and if they need to buy a pair of shoes or a jumper, they can buy one from anywhere in the world that sells them. And that's a good thing. The bad thing is that that impacts on things that happen in bricks and mortar stores. It impacts on other things. So there's a cause and an effect. And Dr Grimmer's work and the work that the consultancy that came about through this notice of motion explored some of that. And I'm not going to go into that, but one thing that, you know, as a councillor you really wish happened is that people out there took the time to read the documentation, took the time to read Dr Grimmer's report, took the time to read this item in front of us today. Because when they then jump online and make commentary about the centre of the city, they'll be doing so from a position of evidence, which unfortunately a lot of people don't like. I've learnt in the last 12 months that we have more epidemiologists in Australia than anywhere else in the world. Every second person, Mr Mayor, is an expert. And they are on retail as well, I've noted. Well, councillors around this table, Mr Mayor, in recent times, in the last 12 months or so, would have had people ripping into us about businesses that have closed. And I remember someone collaring me in the supermarket about a women's clothing business that closed and how they were distraught about that. Now, I listened to what they had to say and I said, when was the last time you bought an item from them? They said, oh, just before it shut. And I said, when was the last time you went into the store? They went, oh, 12 months ago, I buy it all online. So this report shows that retail has changed. The recommendation that's before us today, Mr Mayor, goes a long way to bringing the way CityProm, the way organisations like CityProm work in the current time that we're in. And things that worked well, very well back in the day that Mr Fitch highlighted and have worked well over that preceding time may not work so well today. Things have changed. And as I often say, Mr Mayor, around the table when we talk about the inner city, people need to be part of the solution. And that's not just the consumer, that's also the business owner. I went to a business to buy something recently and they didn't have something in my size. And the shop owner said, I can get it online. So here I am trying to be a good person, spending my hard-earned in our city, and they tell me to go online and do it. So we all need to be part of the solution. What this gives us today, Mr Mayor, is a sensible way forward that will bring some positive change to the way our CBD operates. And one of the massive advantages we have is the fact that we are, in terms of geography, a fairly small city. People have said and contacted me in light of this item being here today, I live at Mowbray. You know, I don't care what goes on in the centre of the city, like it's hundreds of kilometres away. Well, you need to care.
Thank you, Councillor Sauer. Your time is up. With any extension?
Thank you.
Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have a, in terms of geography, you can live at Kings Meadows and drive into the centre of the city in 7 minutes. You can live at Mowbray, Newnham, drive into the town in 12 minutes. Councillor Mackenzie summed it up very well, paraphrasing the work from Dr Grimmer's report, that, yeah, of course, you know, people say, oh, you know, I live at Kings Meadows, I'm not coming into town, I've got to pay parking. I want to buy a pair of shorts, I buy them at Woolworths, that's fine. But there are lots of other shops in town that sell lots of other brands of those shorts, to paraphrase Councillor Mackenzie. This recommendation before us today, Mr Mayor, gives us some significant direction going forward, which again was my hope in bringing this notice of motion some time ago, that we would have some data, that we would have some empirical evidence that would then guide the decision we made. And I'm very happy, Mr Mayor, if people want to criticise council, that's fine, everyone's entitled to a view. But what we've got in front of us is some data that's been independently sourced, very detailed reports, two very detailed reports that guide a way forward. So I'll conclude my remarks. I'm very, very happy to support it. I noted that when the item came to council with my notice of motion some time ago, CityProm were very strongly in support of that review. And as in closing my commentary, in the item it shows, at the top of the item, for those who may be wondering, it shows a significant amount of work, the numbers of time that this has been considered by council. This is something that's been developed over a period of time, workshop with councillors, had some significant involvement and is very, very detailed and worthy of our support. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Just reading through the recommendation, and it's item D. I don't know if the CEO or someone else in the room might be able to explain where we uncouple the linkage between the CityProm boundary and the CBD promotional rate and complete a staged restructure over 4 financial years to broaden the funding of CityProm from Launceston CBD businesses to the general rate commencing in the year 2022-23. So are you able to put a dollar figure on what that initial amount might be that an average ratepayer might pay either as a householder or a business owner or something similar?
I think Paul's going to answer that. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mayor. I did some rate modelling just based on this 21-22 year, and the median residential rate will increase by just under $3, $2.93 per year. No, per year, because there's 30,000 properties, so this is 1/4 of the transition. And if you took an average of the rateable properties, which is 32,271, it'd come out to about $4.39 per year for each property.
Thank you.
Yep.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. But to be fair, what's not recommended is that it would be clearly an increase to rates. What it's saying is that it would uncouple. And so doesn't that mean that as council determines its budget, as it does for every year, and considers all of the contributions and spending lines that we make for every single item every single year, that the change to City Prom progressively over a 4-year period would be implemented into the consideration of the budget? Not that it would be an additional rateable amount, absolutely, indefinitely added to the rateable figure.
That'll be for each councillor to consider each year, but I don't know if the CEO wants to add to that.
Yeah, the Deputy Mayor is correct, and obviously part of the recommendation is around improved governance around the approval, you know, in terms of the budgets each year. So obviously there are decisions that will be made by council into the future around any proposals to increase expenditure on marketing of the central city, and so so I think the importance of the governance changes are equal to the uncoupling of the rating structure.
And Mayor, just in terms of context, a comparison it wouldn't be unlike something like the FOGO service, for example, where some residents are benefiting but the whole municipality is paying. Would that be a good comparison?
I think that is a good comparison, yes. Well
Thank you.
We have a question from Councillor Walker.
Thank you. And if I may direct my question to our Financial Officer and his assessment of what it would mean to, as a percentage, I suppose, of the average rate base, what would it mean as a reduction to a CBD property that does currently pay the additional levy that is associated with funding City Prom?
Yeah, thanks for that. So again, we talk about medians because you'll get outliers either side, but a CBD property, so they'd cop an increase because they're sharing this spread over the 4 years, but they'd cop about $170 credit in that particular year, offset against an $8 or $9 increase. So yes, they benefit. It's redistributing. We're not raising more rates, but we're redistributing who pays what.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins, wish to speak?
I do, thank you. I'm one of the councillors who are ambivalent, I think, when it comes to City Prom as an organisation. I guess the way I feel about it kind of spins on a dime depending on which officer is working for the organisation at the time, because they've had some exceptional operators. I know that the board members, there are some incredibly committed people there too, and none of what I'm going to say has any bearing on those people. I just think, as I've said before, this organisation has really outlived its usefulness to us. I suspect that it had that usefulness in the 80s, and I don't believe it has anymore. I think the work that we're doing on branding, we're putting a decent amount of money into that branding exercise, the City of Gastronomy. Some of these kind of mechanisms will lead the City of Launceston in the future. I don't know that it's the time to remove funding altogether, so I support the motion, the amended motion here today, and I think it's imperative that we get the report back around in a year's time so we understand how those accountability measures can be viewed by us and by the entire community. If I can beg your indulgence for a moment, just to give you a way of comparison, in my day job I work for the not-for-profit, the RSPCA, and for the same amount of money we deliver the entire program of every single report of animal cruelty in the whole state of Tasmania. That's thousands of phone calls, every single one is assessed and then followed up on by one of our 7 inspectors. We look after those animals if they're seized, we pay for the court process out of that, we pay for the whole process for $500,000. So I look at those comparisons and I say, well, do we get $500,000 in value from City Prom, and I don't think we do. So in this year and in that report, from my perspective, I want to see significant change. I want to see deliverables. They need to be accountable. And I also want to see real change. Every time I see the Crazy Day sale promoted, I wonder if anybody who promotes that or understands, I mean, craziness is an attribution to mental health issues. It's not something that we take lightly anymore. We've got to change the way that our language is used in the community. And this is one of those ways that we need to change. It's not funny. It's not funny for people to be crazy. And a Crazy Day sale is not what that is. It's a sale. It's a bulk sale for city traders. We'll give it another name. It's been too long since this organisation has made any meaningful change in this city. And I think in this 12 months, it either makes those changes and moves on, or it's disbanded and we use a hashtag, or we use our branding exercise, or we use something else instead, but we cease to use this model.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. One thing, I went on council to help ratepayers, and increasing their rates by 0.5%. I know it's nothing, $3, $5, nothing, but it's not fair. And also, there's big shops at Mowbray, Invermay, Newstead, Kings Meadows. They're going to be increased by hundreds of dollars, not a few dollars. You know, these massive big shops, Target out at Mowbray, they're going to get $200 or $300. It's not much, but it's an increase, an unfair increase on them. The users should pay. It's going to benefit the people in the middle of town. It's not going to benefit the ones at Mowbray. So this is not fair. Simple as that. It's not fair on the ratepayer, the normal old ratepayer, not fair on the big businesses at Mowbray. My idea of having a car in the middle of town, like I mentioned 18 months ago, would make this town busier than anything. 50 grand I said it was going to cost, and that would improve, and that would have boosted the sales massively. I accept expanding the boundaries, I'd accept that, but to put it onto every ratepayer, I'm totally against it. It's not fair. You've got to get value for money, and at the moment it hasn't been working. We've been spending 500 grand a year on it, and what's it done? So it's good to get a review on it. I commend Councillor Sal on bringing it up, and I don't know where we go from here, but increasing the boundaries and make the user pays is probably the fairest way to do it. Instead of expecting the people at Mowbray, Kings Meadows and all the ratepayers to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a question through you to Councillor Spencer, if I may. What I'm hearing Councillor Spencer advocating for is an increase of around $170 per year on the businesses that are not currently contained within the area that you'd like to see the boundary area increased to. Is that correct?
Yeah, increase up to the hospital where we originally set up the Charles.
So an additional rate of about $170 per business?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Yep, you may.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I certainly want to recognise the amount of work that's gone into this by the external consultant and through the Grimmer report, and indeed the way I think that we as a council have workshopped this a number of times. For me, it's just an absolute furphy to suggest that this is about increasing the rates for the residents of our city. For me, and the way that I'm looking at this, it sits alongside those things that we already contribute to, that we value. Those things that we determine have a deliverable that is returned to the whole municipality, impacting in some instances thousands of people and in others hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, but that we determine have a strategic imperative that are worthy of support. And I referenced in a previous item things like our contribution to the NTDC, things like our contribution to Tamar and NRM North, things like our contribution to Business Events Tasmania, things like our contribution to Visit Northern Tasmania. All of those are things that we strategically believe derive benefit and deliverables to the municipality as a whole. So whilst I understand that in the 1980s, 6 business blocks were the heart and soul of the city, it has changed, it has grown, it has developed. The CBD is no longer contained within 6 blocks. It's broader than that. It needs to be dynamic, it needs to respond, it needs to, for some initiatives, go to the seaport, and for other initiatives, go to Invermay. And that's what this particular model does, because through this model, by believing in the return that CityProm can and should and will need to derive for the city, we will be investing in that kind of model. And the whole municipality will be investing in that model because it's imperative to the whole municipality. Without a strong, healthy, vibrant heart, there is no municipality. And so the 6 blocks that worked in 1988 absolutely worked for those businesses when they had to, get all of the businesses to agree to be part of the serviceable area. But it's changed and it's different. And I actually don't think businesses that currently sit outside that serviced area would support a council implementing an additional levy on them, because we want to be flexible, we want to be nimble, we want to respond as things present. And as Councillor Dawkins so rightly said, we want to enhance the rigour of what they're doing in order to see some benefit and return. And this particular structure, the particular amendment from Councillor Mackenzie, and indeed item C, which we've been trying to do as a council for the 10 years that I've been here, and we've struggled to even meet with them to get some deliverables, are things that are actually listed and will be achieved. So I believe that this is a model that will not see an absolute definite increase of our rates based on us distributing and uncoupling the rate. It will see us invest in a model that increases the rigour, increases our control, increases our strategic alignment, increases our connection between a division of placemaking that we've devised in our own organisation to see enhanced benefits for the whole of Launceston from a strong, healthy, sustainable heart.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Question first, thank you, Mayor. Can I just get clarity on the amended part that Councillor Mackenzie, that we are currently debating? What was the amendment? Was it in part F? No, part 2. So the outcomes of the working group are to be presented to Council for endorsement. And I see the red's no good, I'm colourblind. Yeah, that's better. Endorsement. It's just a comment blank. Okay, thank you very much. Look, I'd like to, initially standing to make an amendment to the motion. Amendment to the amended motion. That in part F, is it part F? No, sorry, start again. In part D, where we say that we will extend, broaden the funding of CityProm to Launceston from CBD businesses to the general rate, commencing 22-23, that part is removed. But I'm quite supportive. I won't.
Sorry, you're taking out D altogether? I haven't.
No, just the part commencing from in part D. To broaden the funding, thank you.
No, that changes it. That's not an amendment, so we'll need to have this motion, and then if it doesn't get up, is that correct? I think.
No. So
he can move it as
an amendment. That changes fundamentally the intent of the condition. So it's not an amendment. This is an alternate proposal that he's putting forward.
Oh, sorry, an alternate motion. Yes.
Yeah, it's not an amendment.
Correct.
So, like the Mayor said, it's probably appropriate to foreshadow that.
Okay. Should this not get up?
All right, I will foreshadow that, and I will speak to that partially when I speak. I'm up, thank you. I'll leave my microphone on then. Look, the CBD has changed ever since I suppose, 1974 or sometime like that, when Kmart came to town. They initially, as you know, urban myth would have it, wanted to sort of knock down a block over near George Street somewhere, and that wasn't amenable to the City of Launceston, so they chose to build where they did on Racecourse Crescent. It has changed the CBD. It won't come back to the same it was. If we think of Launceston in the 1960s, and I'm sure everyone has seen archival footage where you've got throngs of people in the streets, it was a busy, vibrant CBD. That started to change. That preempted the idea that we needed to promote the CBD to bring people back in. But it's not going to change the nature of our city and the diversification that's gone on. We've contributed to it. We've allowed Bunnings to build down in Inverest. We've allowed other big boxes to come into this city. I don't expect that we can stop that from happening. We might be able to channel it in different ways, but it does mean that the CBD changes, and it won't come back to those glory days ever again. What happens in other big cities is, of course, you have more workers in cities, they support the CBD, they become a tourist destination, that supports the CBD. But the idea that there's going to, that Launcestonians are going to come here more when they don't need to go to their local bank, there's no hardware store in town, they don't need to do their shopping in the city, the idea that that could be changed, I don't think is feasible. Yes, Dr Grimmer did say that more specialty shops would be an advantage to the CBD. How do we attract those? Do we just let the market decide, or do we, proactively as a council create the spaces that might attract more diverse businesses? I'm not sure. They're all discussions I'd like to have. I don't think they are things that really can come out of an organisation like CityProm, whose prime objective is to market the CBD as it is, to organise events and to promote the CBD. Who do they promote it to? Of course, mostly to Launceston residents, mostly to Launceston ratepayers. Who's being asked to pay for it? Mostly Launceston ratepayers. Are we going to get an addition to our rate base? Not exactly. We're going to find the money, we're going to absorb it into our budget at the moment. But it still means then we're taking money from somewhere else in our budget, about $600,000 or so. So I have problems with that. This is why I'm foreshadowing that, I would like to move an alternate motion. It's not a lot of money. I accept that entirely. It's more the principle of the matter for me that all of Launceston is being tasked with funding a marketing exercise to get them to shop in the CBD. They already shop there anyway. I would imagine, the percentage of people who are in the CBD at any given time would be largely Launcestonians. Do they need to be told to shop in the CBD? Possibly not. Of course, encouraging more tourists, people from outside Launceston, that's great, and probably some of that is what CityProm does. But when we look at the big long list, besides CityProm, the Chamber of Commerce, our own placemaking teams and our City Heart project, the branding exercises, tourism, Northern Tasmanian Development Corporation. There's a lot of players who are all wanting to see, an improvement to our economic standing. And I'm sure everyone around here is the same. We all stand up and say, I love the CBD, I want to see the CBD go ahead. It'll have to go ahead in a different way in the future if we want it to be a more vibrant CBD, not in the same way. So what does that involve? I certainly have some ideas, and I'm sure other people do too, but I don't think it's going to be based purely on retail. I think that cities who have become more successful have broadened their base. They do become, it is true, we did want the university to utilise parts of the city. That hasn't exactly happened, although they will be closer to the CBD. There are other attractions, there are other spaces that we can create that make it desirable to come to the CBD. We haven't really got to that point yet. And certainly I do welcome Mr Basil Fitch to our meeting today as an ex-Launceston councillor. And when it comes to the market, I agree that's another thing that brings people to the CBD. It's really quite obvious what works and what doesn't. And sure enough, a sale day or a Christmas parade obviously does bring people to the city as well, but that's not really what we're going to rely on.
Excuse me, your time's up. Do you need an extension?
I do, thank you, Mayor.
Moved Councillor Soward, seconded Councillor Spencer. All those in favour for an extension? That's granted. Thank you.
That's not what we're going to rely on to create a vibrant heart, as one councillor suggested. And another councillor talking about, you know, the property owners, the landowners, how do we engage with them? Well, I do believe that the market will take care of itself if the right incentives are created. Buildings will be rented, specialty shops will arrive if the people are there. So it's a little bit chicken and egg, but the council's role is to provide that vibrancy, those spaces that people feel welcome, that people are attracted to, that people want to go to again and again. And I think we have a lot of work in that area to do in the future. So, having said all that, I am foreshadowing an alternate motion to keep the funding of City Prom as it is, because I'm certain that City Prom will have to evolve. It will have to work with other groups more actively and perhaps be absorbed into something greater at some point. And I'm not sure whether now is the time to move the cost associated with that onto the general rate base. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the previous aldermen for their thoughts on this matter. City Prom is charged with promoting the centre of Launceston as a place to enjoy shopping and the shopping experience, which includes food and various other things. And if you look at some of the advertising we see on TV, almost inevitably 3 or 4 of the 7 shots are all stocked in cafes or something similar. And that recognises the changing dynamics that we have in our city. As Councillor Walker said, back in the 1960s and 70s, everyone had to come to Launceston to buy anything because you couldn't buy anything that was mail order. And if it didn't come on a ship, it didn't get here, probably. However, the change happened probably not quite because of that. It probably started to change in the 1980s when technology started to change people's jobs. People no longer had to work in an office to shuffle a bit of paper. A computer held that information and that could be accessed from anywhere. So what we've seen is a change of what a CBD is. And similarly, in shopping malls around the world, there has been a change. Once, if you were setting up a mall, and a mall being the American shopping mall, you would always guarantee to have fashion on your main street. That was the key puller of people to your shopping precinct. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. Food is the new fashion, and that is part of our problem as far as our own mall, this time in Brisbane Street. It doesn't have any food outlets in it. And when people talk about the avenue being successful, guess what? That's where all the food outlets are. It's not because they have cars going down the middle of the street, it's actually because that's where the food is. So the city will have to evolve, but the city has to be promoted to everyone. And it's not just the residents of Launceston, it is in fact the residents of West Tamar and Meander Valley and Burnie and Hobart. And so City Prom in their new role will have a role to promote people coming to Launceston as a desirable place to visit. And when they visit, they probably won't care too much if they're not in the CBD, but they might end up shopping at Mowbray or Kings Meadows or at Kmart if that's where they happen to find themselves and wanting something to eat or drink. However, City Prom will be responsible for promoting Launceston as a destination as far as shopping is concerned. And I think you have to have a very strong city heart to keep the rest of the city vibrant. If we let the city die, then yes, the regional shopping centres like Kings Meadows and Mowbray will probably pick up the slack, but that's to the detriment of all of us. I really do believe that. So for me, it's a pretty simple question. It was a question that I couldn't believe the answer of $4 a year in year one is what it will cost the average ratepayer for us to promote this city. Whilst it will probably rise to a bit more than that by the time the year 4 and 5 comes around, I still think of the region. So I'm happy to support this motion as it is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. every one of us benefits from a vibrant CBD, not just retail. All of northern Tasmania does. Look at our schools, our other businesses, our airports. If we don't have a vibrant CBD, a vibrant city, we're not going to have great house prices. We're not going to have population growth. We're not going to have nice parks. We're not going to have the ratepayers here. I believe myself it's one of my most important responsibilities as a councillor to ensure that the city heart is healthy and the city heart is beating. I acknowledge this, looking back at the past and telling stories of remember when we didn't have the internet, but we need to look forward. And I do believe that realigning CityProm through this motion will allow us to actively market not retail shops but the actual city itself more effectively moving forward. And just to finish off on a quote in the report which I thought was very fitting, and I'm probably going to read that again. The Council is committed by achieving the Launceston City Heart's vision of making central Launceston the premier business, retail and lifestyle hub of northern Tasmania and cement the city's reputation as one of the most livable regional cities in Australia. We need to let people know that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy, you have the chair just for a few minutes. I'm not going to repeat what everybody's been said, but there's been some good debate and good discussion. And I'm probably like Councillor Dawkins and the Deputy Mayor to one point in that I really went into this at the beginning thinking we probably don't need a city prom for our city. I've had those thoughts over the last 3 or 4 years, there's no doubt about that. And I'm still thinking, do we or don't we? But I think I'm a bit like what Councillor Daking has said. We need a vibrant CBD. We need it not just for the CBD, for the shops in the CBD. We need it for Launceston. If we want Launceston to be one of the great regional cities of the world eventually, we need to have a very vibrant city centre. How do we get a vibrant city centre? It's by having an organisation that's going to help us to promote it. There's no doubt about that. And we need to, that's why I like this motion where it is talking about performance criteria. It's making sure that we see what they're doing and where they're going and how we check on what they're doing as well. There is a lot of changes in here for the motion, which is something that I think is important. So the next few months will determine that. But the CBD comes alive when we have a market out here in Civic Square. People don't just come into Civic Square, they go through the CBD. When we have the Saturday morning market, the city becomes alive. People go and walk around and do some shopping in the CBD. When we have lighting of the Christmas tree, organised by CityProm, thousands of people come to our CBD. That's what's going to make Launceston vibrant, having events and events and events. I'd love to see an event once a week, if not more, in our CBD or close to our CBD, because that's what brings people in. It's been right. People have said the city is changing, and it is changing. What it's going to be is a destination place. What it's going to be is a place where people want to come, have an event, go to the event, and then go around and enjoy a restaurant or whatever they want to do with a coffee shop or go and buy some clothes or whatever it might be. So it's extremely important for our region, not just for the city of Launceston, for the whole region to have a very vibrant CBD. If we have a vibrant CBD, the whole region is going to benefit. The whole region, not just us in the CBD, not just the shops in the CBD. We've got to get rid of that sort of thinking it's just for a select number of people. It's for the whole region, it's for all of us. And there's many examples of that. I think sport is another typical example. We put money into sport, lots of money into different grounds, and some people say, but I never play sport. Why do I support money going into the NTCA grant? We do that regularly, 200,000 or more a year. Why would I do that in my rates? Because it's a benefit for our community. Why do you put money into the swimming centre? Not everybody goes to the swim. Some people don't like swimming, but we still do it for the region. We do it for those that want it, and it makes this city a better city. We have a theatre. We put 260,000, isn't it, something like that, we put into the theatre. But some people say, I never go there. I don't like the theatre. But we shouldn't do things what just one person doesn't or doesn't like. We've got to do what's going to make our whole city a place to thrive. And it's going to have things for different people, and it's going to bring these events and whatever it is, whether it's sport, the theatre or something in town. It brings people, it's great for not only our locals, but it is fantastic for tourism. And another one that we support, New Year's Eve. Not everybody goes to it. That doesn't mean it's not good or bad, but it's something for people to do on New Year's Eve, and tourists love it. people in the city do love it. Some do, some don't. We need to be not just looking at individuals, but looking at overall, what do we want this city to be? How are we going to be a great regional city? And that, to me, is going to help me to vote for this motion, because I believe what we do need to see is a good framework, and then when it comes back to council, we can have a further discussion. So, thank you, Deputy.
Back to you, Mayor.
Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. And look, I thank everybody for the passion. I think this has been a very passionate subject and one of the ones we've debated the most over this council. So I think thank you for that. So it means everybody has an opinion about it. And everybody, I think, understands. And I think Councillor Spencer said, I'm here for all the ratepayers. I think the other 11 of us are as well. We're here for the ratepayers of Launceston. That's why we put our hand up to come here to actually support and get the best outcomes for the ratepayers of Launceston in many myriad of things. I think the Mayor summed it up beautifully about the fact that we've got a lot of strategic things in this town, like football grounds, swimming pools, parks, which we just fund. I see the CBD as another strategic asset of this city that we need to continue to support. Like others, I came to the review of City Prom not thinking we might actually end up with a conversation about keeping it, to be honest, and I think there are some in the room that started that way and have probably moved around a bit. The purpose of the amendment to the motion is to give us another look at it. There's a number of things from A to F that we're actually charging a working group to go away and have a look at and come back and report to us. So to me, what we've got is we've got time for them to go away and report and look at all the various things, take into account the conversations we've had, take into account things that the ratepayers of Tasmania might say in their letters to us, and actually consider how that might work to make this the best outcome that we can get strategically to benefit this city. Because as the Mayor said, I mean, Launceston Airport has got back to 80% pre-COVID flights without any international travel. Why is that? Because we're a destination. If we haven't got a CBD and all the hotels that are all around the city, we ain't got a destination. I can tell you that now. So I think it's really important that we do that. But I think there's a working group to be formed with a group of people to come back and tell us how we're going to do this going forward. So we get a second chance to come back and review whether this is the right path forward. It gives us time for others to give feedback in relation to it all. And I think in here, the Deputy Mayor pointed out to me in the budget and financial aspects, and it says financial modelling has demonstrated that this financial restructure can be accommodated in accordance with the Council's long-term financial plan projected rate increases over the period. So it means that we actually don't have to increase the rates to do it. We can actually absorb it in there. I take Councillor Walker's issue that we may be doing that instead of doing something else. But like everything, I mean, we had a discussion this morning about something that's costing the ratepayers a few dollars every year in one of the meetings we had pre-council. So the question is, not everybody benefits from that particular exercise either. So I think we just need to be mindful that this is strategically about what we are as a city, and we need to vote to try and get the best outcome we can for the city. So I implore this, we get a second bite at it later on in the year or later on next year to determine whether it's the right thing for us or not.
Thank you. Your time was up. You did well. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's 2 against. The rest are for. The motion is carried. We now close the meeting. Oh no, sorry, we have a motion to go into closed, Council. I nearly forgot that. Move, Councillor Soward. Thank you, councillors. We're back in open council and your microphones are picking up sound. So can we have a motion? Somebody happy to move the motion that's on the screen there? Councillor Soward moves, seconded Councillor McKenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. Close the meeting.